Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I would like to welcome you to today's program, which is Transitioning to Open Research, Publisher and Librarian Perspectives in 2020, and it is sponsored by Cambridge University Press. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues in librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started today, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. First off, everyone that joins as an attendee is automatically muted and your cameras are disabled. So please don't worry about generating noise or feedback. We have that taken care of. In the main area of the screen then, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. And today we are using the Q&A feature. So please use that to put questions to our speakers today. You should also be able to see in there other attendees' questions. If you have the same question as someone else or you think the question is a good one, please use the little thumbs up icon in the Q&A section to upvote that question. At the end of the presentation, we'll take time to answer as many questions as we have time for. So please do put your questions in there throughout the presentation. Also note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. Our speakers today are John Edwards, the Open Research Sales Manager at Cambridge University Press, and Carol Hoover, the Digital Information Resources Manager at the Los Alamos National Laboratories. So with that, we are ready to get started. So I will turn things over to John.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. My name is John Edwards. As Mark says, I'm part of the Open Research team here at Cambridge University Press. I'm joining you today from autumnal New York. We're just starting to enjoy some very crisp, lovely autumnal weather. Wherever you're joining us from today, I hope you and yours are well. Thanks very much for signing up for the webinar. The ambition today is to spend the hour presenting two perspectives on the transition to open research. One from us, CUP, a university press, and another from the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is an institution that has just recently started a transformative journals agreement with us. So I'll be outlining the publisher perspective for around 15 minutes in a short presentation, and then we'll welcome Carol for a conversation to explore the experiences of Los Alamos in beginning this transformative journals agreement with CUP. As Mark says, please do use the chat box to ask questions, and please do use the upvoting functionality. We've got time set aside at the end to answer them all. So to begin, I'm going to explore a couple of different areas about the CUP perspective on open research in 2020. We're going to look at our general philosophy. We're going to look at where we are in 2020 with a few headline statistics. We're also going to look at what we're doing to our journal's business, specifically around read and publish. We're also going to look at our journals themselves and how the list as a whole is changing towards an open future. And we're also going to look at some of our workflows and see what we're doing in that area to transition us toward being a more open university press. So to start with our philosophy, open research is a huge priority for us, but what really defines our philosophy in this area? And I think the key starting point is to frame our position in open research around our mission. And as a university press, really one of the building blocks of our organization is the desire to disseminate research and knowledge of the very highest quality. And in this regard, open research offers really clear benefits to us in better achieving that stated aim. Really, the more open publishing we do, the better. Our status as a university press also contributes to our philosophy in a financial sense. And what I mean by that is that wherever possible, we believe that the cost to transition to open research should be, at the very least, minimal or really non-existent. We're really, really keen to advertise the fact that it should be financially achievable for institutions to move and start publishing their research open at no additional cost. And that's really important to us. We're not treating open research as a business opportunity, and non-for-profit principles really guide us and are really important in this area as they are in lots of other areas. Around our journals, we really see the ecosystem changing quite substantially over the coming years, as it has done already, really. We see partnerships between publishers and institutions shifting, and that would be away from a fairly transactional journal subscription model towards real partnerships where the delivery of combined provisions of services is at the very center. Read and Publish is at the very kind of cornerstone of our offering in this respect, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And our philosophy around open research is all-inclusive. And when I say that, I mean that we don't believe that the benefits of publishing open should be just limited to those in STM disciplines. HSS journals also have an open future, and a very rich one at that. And we're working hard to secure futures for all of our titles on our journals list, right across the disciplines we represent. And that's really important for us as a guiding principle. Nothing should be left behind, and everybody can benefit. Finally, we're really engaged and motivated to change things right across the research lifecycle. We're talking about journals today, but we also have a developing institutional offer around open books publishing. That's starting to become very, very important to us. We've recently also launched Cambridge Open Engage, which is a preprint server. So we're not just looking at that final version of record journals article and that becoming open. We're looking right across the life cycle, as I say, and looking at pre-accepted versions of research. We're looking at open peer review. We're looking at open data. We're looking at the whole piece. And I think that's really important to us too. So statistics-wise, where are we in 2020 and 2021? We've got a number of new gold journals launching next year. We've got 5 new journals launching in 2021. We continue to launch new journals in very specific subject areas and in areas where we think they can really benefit from a new gold journal. That's really important to us. We're not just launching journals as we please. We're really carefully considering where can benefit. We're also continuing to flip journals when they reach a specific point and when we know that it's sustainable for that individual title to do so. We've flipped 7 journals to gold open access since 2019. Read and Publish, as I say, is absolutely essential to us. And we've got over 600 institutions across the world covered by Read and Publish institutions over the course of around 28 individual agreements, some of which are at national level, some of which are at statewide level here in the United States, and some, like our agreement with Los Alamos, are at a single institutional level. Our journals list now has 90% of titles accepting different routes to open access. So we've got gold journals and we've got hybrid journals, and those make up around 90% of our 400 or so titles that we operate. That number has gone up significantly over the past few years, and we're very proud to have such a broad offering of routes to open on our journals list. And most impressive of all, I think, is that now in 2019, 15% of our total output in our journals was published open. And that's, again, a significant increase from where we started just a few years ago. We're seeing really rapid growth in that figure, and we really hope that it will continue. Read and Publish is a global product, and we offer it in every single market that we're present in. And as this map shows, we've got a large number of partnerships, and partnerships is the key word for Read and Publish. And I think that continues to define how we engage with institutions around open research. There's a chance to foster a much deeper and a much richer partnership between publisher and institution. And I think we've seen the rewards of that in many of the existing read and publish agreements that we've got. It's moving away from, as I said, that transactional process towards something where we can actually change how things are done for the better. And that's a really exciting prospect. Looking into 2021, we're now bringing read and publish front and center into all of our renewals conversations. And I think the reason we're doing that is kind of threefold, really. One is that nothing's really changed. It's a continuation of read and publish being a huge priority for us, of open research being a huge priority for us. So it's more of the same in that respect. But global events have definitely underscored the need for research and knowledge to be immediately accessible and immediately usable to the widest possible audience. And I think it would be remiss to exclude that from any conversation around open research in this day and age. We now understand exactly how vital it is that everybody has access to the latest research when they need it. But we're also placing read and publish front and center because we do want to dispel this idea that moving to a transformative journals agreement is out of reach for most institutions. That's simply not true. And we're going to be working very, very hard to spread that message amongst our partners. And because of that, we are including an open access option in every single journal's renewal, every single journal's renewal conversation that we are having for 2021. And I think that will have a big effect on our footprint of read and publish, particularly in the US. All of this is with one specific goal in mind, and that is to effect rapid change on our journals list. We want to increase the amount of open research which is coming out of our journals list, and we want to do it quickly. So looking at the journal specifically, I mentioned earlier that we've seen quite a rapid shift, and I think if we pause and just look at that table which is on the slide, I think that really illustrates the direction of travel that we're going in. We're reducing the number of journals that offer no routes to open, we're increasing hybrid journals, and we're increasing the number of gold journals on our list. We expect that trend to continue as we go forward. I also want to mention what we're doing around copyright, because I think bound up in questions or conversations around openness of research are issues around author control and author use of their own intellectual property. And I think we've taken a very strong stance on this and are now taking steps to ensure that wherever possible, authors retain copyright when they publish in a Cambridge journal. Authors do retain copyright when they publish gold open access, but we think that should be true irrespective of whether the article ends up being behind a paywall or if it's published open. And we're really happy that over 70% of our journals have already implemented or have committed to implementing a brand new set of guidelines which will ensure that authors retain copyright irrespective of irrespective of whether the article is open or not. And that's really something we're very, very proud of. The workflow in terms of our publishing output is incredibly important too. And I think our change and our efforts in terms of read and publish and in terms of open research stretch into every single corner of our organization. And the publishing workflow is also part of that. So we've paid very, very close attention to decision points in the publication process. The decision point where an author actually elects to publish open access. We've streamlined that. We've taken out some of the potential inhibiting stages which we found were having an effect on whether or not an article went open or not. We've also worked really, really hard to improve the signposting through the publication process to alert authors wherever possible that they have the opportunity to publish open at no additional cost when part of a read and publish agreement. That's really important because this is new for authors. This is a new opportunity which hasn't been around before. And we do have a very important role to play in signposting and in generally playing a sort of an advocate role, I think, in terms of the benefits of open research generally. And with that in mind, we're looking really carefully at how we expand, refine, and I think innovate around the way we're communicating with certain disciplines, with certain communities, and how we spread that message around the benefits of publishing open. I think that's, again, a really important responsibility that we've got as a publisher. We have to spread that good word, I think. And I think we're looking at new and innovative ways to reach authors. How do we utilize some of the kind of peer-to-peer communication networks that exist within certain subject clusters or within certain journals even? There's lots to work with, and I think we're going to be expanding how we utilize those for the benefit of the entire list that we've got. Ultimately, we're really committed to delivering a publishing workflow which actually delivers default open access publication. And I don't mean that we're going to remove the choice that surrounds publishing open or not. We will continue to preserve that, and that won't go away. We think that's really important. But what we will do is create a workflow where an author has to opt out of publishing open, whereas right now the case is the opposite, that an author has to opt in to publishing open should they wish to do so. We think that's going to have a huge impact on the pace of change that we see in terms of that proportion of open content that's on our list. So that's what we're doing. We've got a lot of activity which continues to happen, and I think open research continues to be a defining priority at CUP in 2020 and looking ahead to 2021. And of course, at the very center of that is the partnerships that we've got with research organizations and institutions around the world. And I think at this point, I'd like to bring in Carol Hoover, who is the librarian at the Los Alamos National Laboratory and has very, very kindly agreed to have a conversation with me around their decision and around their experience of beginning a transformative journals agreement with Cambridge University Press. So Carol, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself very briefly before we get going?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, and to ACRL and Cambridge for inviting me to speak here today. I am a librarian at Los Alamos National Laboratory Research Library. I am the head of the digital collections group here at the library, which until yesterday consisted of a single person, me. We have a new hire who just started yesterday, so hopefully I'll be getting some work soon. But my job is to negotiate license agreements for the scholarly content, and I manage the budget for the digital collections. Oh, no, by the way, we're 100% digital library. We do not buy print, and that's been the case for a decade or more now.
That's really interesting, thank you. And I'm glad to hear that you're expanding your team. That's great news.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
So just for a bit more kind of background for everybody, which disciplines would Los Alamos researchers be kind of operating in, just to kind of frame the context of the institution a little more?
Right, of course. So let me give you a little bit more background on those who may not be familiar with Los Alamos National Lab. And that's more people than you think. But Los Alamos National Lab is a U.S. Department of Energy R&D site. And our mission is to solve national security challenges. So we do work in stockpile stewardship. We are responsible for the safety and reliability of the nation's nuclear stockpile. We do work in nuclear deterrence, in clean energy, climate change, and lately, pandemic modeling. We have a very active biosciences division that has been working on research related to the SARS COVID-2 epidemic since the early days. So we do a lot of different things. We're not just nuclear. Mostly though, we are science, technology, engineering. So it's physics, chemistry, computer science, math, engineering, earth sciences, and of course, life sciences, in addition to a long tail of other disciplines. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some really sort of cutting edge things there that you mentioned. So I'm just thinking that the need for that research to be open and be available to the widest possible audience as soon as possible is very important. But, you know, some of those subject areas that you talked about, they're absolutely cutting edge. So thinking about that, where is Los Alamos generally with kind of open access? Is it a priority for the organization?
It's absolutely a priority, and it has been for a long time. Archive, the physics preprint service, was created here at Los Alamos in 1991. It's now operated out of Cornell Tech, which is part of Cornell University. Mm-hmm. We've been participating in like supporting memberships with organizations like Biomed Central and Public Library of Science and Scope 3 since their inception. We've also managed to negotiate a few APC discounts with some society publishers. So in smallish ways, we've been part of open access since its beginning.
Yeah, and have you got any, I imagine that that's been true for a while, but are there sort of any firm targets around open access at the organization? Are there like formal targets that you're aiming for?
Well, actually there is. So in 2013, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, a US organization out of the White House, issued a memorandum around expanding public access to the results of federally funded research. A lot of people on this webinar are, I'm sure, familiar with that. We were in a unique position at the time, being both an organization within a funder organization, that being the DOE, and being a producer of scholarly content ourselves. So we were absolutely subject to the memorandum. Like many libraries, we were responsible. We were given the responsibility, let me say, of creating processes, tools, and everything surrounding management of the implementation of that mandate. We created a marketing blitz, started educating people. Today we have what I would call a really high submission rate of 75% for making our scholarly content, at least in terms of journal articles and conference proceedings, available to the public.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and there's a lot which is obviously continuing to happen with that federal mandate. So I wonder if we could touch on that a little bit more, because I think we don't yet know which direction that's going to go in. I think we're still waiting for the sort of final version of the mandate. But do you have any expectations about what might be coming, or do you have any, to put it another way, do you have any sort of hopes as to what might be coming as well?
I do have hopes. They're my personal hopes, though. So I'm not speaking for the Department of Energy here. I'm not speaking for Los Alamos National Lab. I'm not even speaking for my library necessarily. But I personally agree with the comments of ARL, the Association for Research Library, and others, that the disadvantages that have been perpetuated by locking scholarly content behind paywalls and embargoes is too costly to science, and it's too costly to society. There needs to be a change, and we plan to be part of that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, I think it's, what's nice is, as a publisher, we also want to be part of that change. And I think that's kind of what I alluded to earlier, that there is, I think only when publishers and organizations come together and start to work together to try and change things is when you actually start to see a material shift in everything. So yeah, I'm not surprised that you have those sort of those views. Yeah, and going kind of, because I think, well, I know this now that you've been involved in archive, the physics preprint service for a while, but I'm interested to know, just kind of purely on a personal level, really, where your interest in open access kind of started and how you first kind of came across it as a concept, and what motivates you to kind of continue working to improve things in this regard.
Well, again, I'd have to go back to archive. Archive's been around a really long time. So I came here to Los Alamos National Lab in the research library in 1998. And that was the library at that time, and the library director strongly supported archive and what it was trying to accomplish. And of course, Los Alamos is very strongly a physics institution, and physicists have a long-standing tradition of sharing their science openly and very early. So that was kind of, I guess, my formative exposure to open access, and it made complete sense to me, and led to our participation in initiatives like Scope 3, which is sponsored out of CERN, to make publications in high energy physics open access immediately upon publication at no charge to the authors themselves. And you know, there's been great reception at Los Alamos to those initiatives, and many people have taken advantage of them and continue to, and the library is here to support the institution. So it's a perfect match for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's really helpful, actually, as a kind of background, and sounds like Los Alamos has been engaged in forms of opening up the scholarly process for a number of years. So thinking about our process of beginning this transformative agreement that we've got, we first discussed this at Charleston last year, actually, which I think feels like a very, very long time ago in a number of different ways. But could you give us an insight into what your process was in terms of considering what we had put forward at that point? Because we had proposed a new way of working in terms of the journal subscription, in terms of repurposing the money, some of the money that you had been spending on a subscription, to pay for the publication of Los Alamos research, open access in some of our journals. So what happened after we had that first discussion from your perspective at Los Alamos?
Well, that was a very fortuitous meeting for us. In a way, we were primed to be receptive to that kind of opportunity. But after that meeting, we decided to seize the opportunity immediately, instead of waiting until we had a perfect plan formed, which, you know, may or may not have ever happened at all. For example, at the point we were talking at Charleston last year, we still had, and today still have, no real idea of what metrics we're going to use to prove the success or failure of this venture. We talking about them, we have some ideas, but we haven't made any decisions on that. But the opportunity was there, and we decided to take it instead of waiting until all the ducks in the row and the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and we have not regretted it.
That's great, yeah. And I think lots of institutions find themselves in exactly that situation you've just described, because they may not have a scholarly communications librarian, for example. They may not have an institutional open access policy in any sort of formal sense, but there is still an opportunity to do something, and there is an opportunity to help the faculty benefit from publishing open. So it's great to hear that actually you didn't have all the answers at that point, but you felt like it was an important step to take.
That's exactly our situation.
Yeah.
The library supports the mission of the institution, which is to create and disseminate science. So it was completely logical for us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we look at various different things during these types of conversations. I think one of the things we shared was the publishing output in our journals, and there's other kind of bits and pieces of data as well. Data is incredibly important to all of these discussions. Was there anything that you were particularly interested in terms of data during those discussions? Anything that maybe you hadn't necessarily seen before or hadn't had an awareness of prior to that discussion?
So the library, like I said earlier, is responsible for tracking institutional publications. We have a review and approval system that every communication, including scientific publications, has to go through a review and approval process before it goes out. And the library built in owns the tool that enables that process. Mm-hmm. So we had some of the data that you provided to us already, but for example, we were not at all tracking corresponding author. We were tracking Los Alamos authors of publications, and we have a pretty sophisticated back-end system that captures a lot of metadata and saves it in a repository. But we weren't tracking that piece of information. Of course, we could go to the website and get it. We could, there's lots of ways to get it, but we couldn't push a button in our own repository and get that information. So that was important information that we're going to have to start capturing in the future. The rest of it was really interesting. You were able to tell us things like who had published open access. In other words, who at Los Alamos had paid the fee for the APC, exactly what journals they were publishing in, how often they were publishing, and then we were able to match that information with what groups internally at the lab are doing the most open access publishing. So there was some information we had, some information you provided, but we combined it all together to make the picture that we needed regarding data.
Yeah, and I think that for lots of people, publishers included, I think this data has always existed kind of in the background for everybody, and people haven't necessarily needed to call upon it in a really meaningful way to kind of have discussions, well, really discussions that relate to something that people are paying for. So I think it's been interesting for us as a publisher. We've taken many steps to kind of improve our data and get it into shape to make it sort of really reliable now, but I don't think it was always like that. So I think everybody's on a bit of a journey with this and is often kind of discovering things about their output really that they didn't necessarily know before. So I think it's always an interesting conversation to put that in front of librarians and to give them that different perspective. Yeah. So thinking about, you mentioned kind of matching that publication data with some of the internal departments at Los Alamos. Did you already have an idea of maybe who would potentially benefit from this agreement? Or were you thinking about it in those terms, or were you thinking it was going to be of benefit to most people, or were you kind of thinking in a slightly more specific way?
Because we've been participating in like supporter memberships for Biomed Central and Public Library of Science and Scope 3 initiatives like that, we had an idea of what groups were more likely to publish open access, but there were some that surprised us also. And so we don't know what's behind it all. There are some demographic changes that are going on here at Los Alamos that may be driving some of this in recent years. For example, 30% of the people who've been hired at Los Alamos National Laboratory have been hired in the last 5 years. So this has changed. It's skewed the demographic to the younger end of the scale, and maybe, I'm speculating here, but maybe towards people who are more familiar with open access publishing and not bound by some of the myths and concerns that are out there surrounding OA publishing, and more willing or able financially, not sure about that last part, to publish open access. So that's maybe something that will or will not bear out as we watch certain metrics over the next few years for these read and publish agreements.
I think that's really interesting, because one of the benefits of read and publish agreements, if there is that facility for APCs to be covered centrally under the journals agreement that the institution has with the publisher, that's a huge benefit to early career researchers who wouldn't typically necessarily have access to abundant sources of external funding, which are more difficult to get in the early stages of careers and so forth. So that's really interesting that you think that it could be a very clear kind of demographic group, an age group basically, that's driving some of the kind of increases in publishing that we're seeing. I'm not sure we've thought about that as a publisher, to be honest with you. I think we're thinking about it in terms of subject areas, or very clear sort of maybe geographic things, or the Carnegie class of the institution or something like that. But that's another kind of way to analyze the data, which is really interesting.
Right, and it's speculation on my part, sure. But given that we have such a large demographic and very recent change here at Los Alamos, it might be a good testing ground. So we'll know in the future.
Yeah, because if we could say that our agreement was able to get early career researchers publishing open who would never have done it otherwise, that would be a really great achievement. I think that would be a really nice thing to be able to do. Yeah, fantastic. So when you announced the agreement internally, once we'd agreed the sort of terms and it was all signed and ready to go, what were the reactions that you had internally when you told people that you'd made this decision?
Okay, that's a good question. The reactions varied. So our researchers were very excited, and immediately we got questions about, okay, when are you going to make this opportunity available for journal X from publisher Y, and on and on and on. So one of the things we're having to do is manage expectations, right? Mm-hmm. So we're making sure people understand that this is the first, but hopefully not the last. And also make it clear that publishing costs money, which something I'm still not certain that the people who use the journals the library provides every day completely understand. But I think every library has that problem. However, from the managers, we got a different kind of question. So their concerns were often around costs. What is this? Is this costing us more money? Is it going to cost us more money in the future? Are we committing to something that we may or may not be able to fund on a sustainable manner? Their questions were around that. So at least two very different perspectives we saw, and some opportunities for education also.
Very interesting. Can I ask you to expand on that? Which areas do you think we need to kind of work on and maybe provide a bit more knowledge for?
Right. So I don't know how many of my managers are watching this right now, but there were some misconceptions about open access. And without getting specific, they reference some of the myths that we often hear about open access being questionable, right, in terms of the maybe the publishers that you're supporting with open access. I think it was some sort of, maybe a reference to some of the problematic open access publishers out there. So that's one example that I can share.
Yeah, sure. And I think it continues to surprise us as well that some of those misconceptions are very much out there. And I think we, as a publisher, we certainly have a responsibility to dispel those myths and to set the record straight, because there is no difference in kind of quality in terms of open access publishing. It goes through exactly the same peer review process as a paywalled article. So there is no difference whatsoever. The decision to publish open comes at the very end of the process. It's completely divorced from that decision as to whether or not the article is accepted. And there are predatory publishers out there. Yeah, we've all read about them, and there's been various sort of lists and investigations and so on. But I think you can be smart in the way that in the partnerships that you choose to begin, basically, I think, certainly from the library perspective. So I think certainly we're in a good place in that regard in terms of being a university press. I would like to think that at least they were comforted by us being a relatively safe bet in that regard. Yeah.
Right. And there was one response I got that I didn't expect at all. So the very day that we posted announcement of this agreement in our lab-wide newsletter, we got a query from a couple of people who were in the process of writing a book. And they had been shopping around various publishers, and they were seeing horrifying prices for the book the book processing charge, the BPC, that they were number one shocked at, and number two they couldn't afford. So they were asking if the Cambridge Read and Publish agreement would cover the BPC for their book.
Yeah.
And I had to tell them no, it was covering journals right now, but we regarded that query as an opportunity to maybe start a prototype model for how we could support book processing charges as well. And we're conducting that conversation with Cambridge right now. Hopefully we could expand to other publishers in the future. So we regard that as an opportunity that we'll be pursuing, but it was not expected.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting, definitely. Yeah. And thinking about your role specifically, Carol, as a librarian, it's the way you're talking, it comes across that you've become a sort of knowledge point within the organization. I'm sure you were very much a knowledge point before, but particularly now in terms of this agreement we've got together, but probably in general. And I wonder if your job has changed at all with the advent of agreements like this.
It has. That is several ways. So it's put me into the role that I haven't been in a while, since the OSTP 2013 memo came out, of having to explain to upper managers what this means for them, because it's not evident, apparently, and can seem like a scary thing in terms of costs. Yeah. So I'm also having to explain internally that we're going to have to start collecting different types of data and see what we can change our internal workflows.
Yeah. And do you value being kind of in amongst all of that process? Do you value being part of this new type of agreement? Because I think the librarian does have a role to play in facilitating these types of agreements. And I just wonder how you feel about that as well.
I absolutely value it. I think it brings us closer to our researcher community. It makes the library an actual partner when we're directly involved with the publication process and the dissemination of science. And I believe it's a different lens through which our researchers and institutional management see the library now. So the one thing I am worried about is that I want to be careful that the library is not seen as a gatekeeper of any kind, that we're not putting ourselves in any position to be approving or disapproving anybody's publication. The choice of a journal venue and how you publish remains the choice of the author. The library is not part of that decision. We just want to, well, we're going to be watching to see what the effects are. Is this going to change where people publish? Is it going to change how often people publish? We do expect some changes in terms of, impact, citations, maybe visibility of the author, the science, the institution. There's lots of things to watch.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there are, as you say, there are lots and lots of metrics to kind of analyze in terms of the effects that these agreements have. And our expectation is that there is a citation advantage for research that's published open. So we should see an improvement in the visibility of the research coming out of the Los Alamos National Lab, which would be a good thing for the organization, full stop. But that's a really interesting point you mentioned about the librarian being present in all of this, but really as a sort of an impartial facilitator, and definitely not as a sort of decider in anybody's decision. Yeah, so maybe a difficult path to kind of tread at times, maybe.
Yeah, we're going to have to be careful about our communications and how we express the new opportunities that are out there for authors in their relationships with the library. And this is not the usual way that institutional management is accustomed to viewing the library. We're generally just a cost center, right? We cost money. But now we have another answer to the question we often get, usually when we're asking for money, is what is the value of the library? And what is the ROI of the library? What do we get for all our money? So now we have a very clear-cut answer to that question, which I think it's going to be a positive thing for everybody going forward.
Yeah, very much so. So to kind of bring things right up to date, and we'll turn to the Q&A in a minute, I think, but just to bring it right up to date, it's September 2020, it's journals renewal season again. There are lots of considerations in the current climate, but I'm interested to know whether the read and publish agreement you've got with Cambridge has changed the way that you're approaching any of the journals renewal conversations that you might be having.
I think it has, though. Our fiscal year starts October 1st. So we don't literally have a budget for 2021 until that happens, but there are conversations already in place. So I think it has changed the way I look at conversations about journal subscriptions and journal renewals. There are a lot of moving parts to read and publish agreements. There are a lot of pieces to it. Maybe it may even be true that there's no two read and publish or publish and read agreements that are exactly alike from publisher to publisher, right? So I know it's not true that we will be able to negotiate an agreement like the one we have with Cambridge for every publisher immediately. We just can't do that. But maybe there are pieces that we can accomplish right now. For example, maybe we can negotiate a discount on the APC right now without going the full-fledged read and publish experience, and progress into the full R&P agreement in a future cycle.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very true, that the solution to publishers transitioning their output to open, each publisher will have a different way of doing it. And I think we're all working from slightly different starting points in a number of different respects. And I think that naturally has a bearing on the nature of the agreements that we can have with institutions. So yes, I think you're right. And that's maybe a challenge for the librarian as well. And I think we're very conscious of that there are different flavors of this agreement around. So, you know, helping you guys to kind of navigate those different types of agreements, I think, is something that publishers need to work quite hard at, because there's no way you can possibly learn every single iteration. You know, that's just not possible, is it?
No, it is. In my experience, it is absolutely not. So piece by piece, step by step for us.
Yeah, definitely. So should we move to the Q&A, Carol? Is there anything else you'd like to say to sort of wrap up this stage of the webinar?
No, I think we can probably go ahead to the Q&A and maybe fill in some gaps, answer some questions that way.
Sure. So if we're looking at the questions that have been upvoted. So Pat says, could you please define read to publish more? So read and publish, which is the kind of name that we've given to our transformative journals agreements, is where we work with the institution to repurpose money that is already being spent on subscriptions to journals, and repurposing some of that money or all of that money, if needs be, to transition the institution's output to open access. So to cover the costs that are associated with publishing the research open access in the journals. So that's the kind of basis of the model or the product. And as I say, that it depends on the balance between how much an institution happens to be spending on their journal subscriptions with us and how many articles they happen to be publishing in our journals each year. And the balance between those two numbers, more often than not, defines what's possible in terms of the read and publish agreement. But something is possible in every single case, and we can at least begin a transition, even if we can't necessarily in all cases complete an immediate full transition of the outputs to open. I hope that's helpful to kind of define that a little bit more. Carol, do you want to, are there any questions that speak to you in the Q&A that you want to look at?
Yeah, there are a couple different ones where people are asking if we're publishing classified information, essentially. And the answer is no, we're not publishing classified information through these agreements. It is only the open literature that we're publishing. And we publish between 2,500 and 3,000 papers a year at Los Alamos in the open literature. You're not going to know much about the classified literature unless you work here, and only if you do certain things when you work here. So classified information is safe.
Barbara's asked, several open access journals have closed during COVID. What's the plan for archiving issues of OA journals which do not have a print equivalent? I'm not sure about that one. I mean, I don't think any of our OA journals have closed during COVID, but the publishers would have some sort of archiving facility, I'd imagine, in certain cases, but where those articles would continue to exist is a very good question. And I suppose whether they have been deposited into repositories, that would be a very good question, if that would be another way that content could outlive the journal that it was originally published in. But I'm not sure about that. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one, Carol, but that's stumped me a little bit.
I've seen the same reports of journals just disappearing during the pandemic. I can't think of any specific titles, though, off the top of my head. Yeah, isn't it the responsibility of the publisher to provide for some sort of mirror or portico, clocks, locks solution for that sort of thing? You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it would depend on whether the publisher had any of that in place, really. And I by and large, they're pretty standard, I think, that sort of archiving type setup these days. But if the publisher didn't have it, then it's possible that the material could disappear, which would be a great shame. Yeah, it's tough, difficult times for many journals out there, I think, at the moment. Yeah. So Jordan's asked a question, which is specifically around the humanities. So what are the benefits for the humanities? What has the progress been? And do humanities journal boards, being largely from academia, do they see the value and urge OA for tenure considerations? I think that question about tenure is very interesting. And I think as a publisher, we're sort of caught in the middle of that a little bit, because considerations of tenure are largely performed at an institutional level. So we can make recommendations that, considerations for tenure should factor in some sort of question around whether somebody is published open or not, but we don't have a huge amount of power in kind of bringing about that change. I think we at CUP see the value in humanities publishing their research open. I know that humanities journals, the usage of research tends to have a much longer tail, and that's very different to sciences, whereby research that's published in the humanities would be cited and used often many years after its original publication, whereas that kind of half-life for science research is much shorter. But that's not to say that humanities research being immediately available and being immediately accessible, particularly across the board in terms of thinking about institutions that don't necessarily have funds to buy subscriptions to the journals. That's a big element, I think, that has kind of huge value. And I think, yeah, we firmly believe, as I said earlier, that the whole spectrum of our journals, which involves many society-owned humanity journals, they should be transitioning, and it will benefit the researchers that are publishing into them. It will benefit the communities that depend on those journals. I think the argument is slightly different, but the baseline assumption of benefits is largely the same. I think, yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think humanities need to be given slightly different considerations, but we're kind of committed, as we are to the humanities, transitioning as much as the sciences. That was a slightly rambling answer, but I hope I've touched upon some points that are of interest to you there, Jordan. We've just got a couple of minutes left. Carol, do you want to pick one last question to answer before we sign off?
Let's see, what we got. Oh, we've been eliminating the ones we've already answered, right? Let's tell this Canadian woman, Olga, is there a read and publish agreement in Canada?
So we don't have a read and publish agreement yet. We've started discussions with CRKN, and we are beginning to look at the specifics around the data and what might be possible. I think certainly achieving an agreement at a national level in Canada is something that is a really key priority for us. As I say, we've started discussions. There isn't anything that exists at this point. We do have an APC discount scheme, which I know extends to many institutions in Canada. So that's kind of the first step. You can publish open access at a discounted rate if you're from a certain set of Canadian institutions. I'm not sure which one you're from, Olga, but we're hoping that we can expand that to a fully fledged read and publish agreement where publication costs would be covered under the journals agreement that we would hope to have at a national level. So much more to come on that front, but we're in the discussions. Yes, is the best thing I can say about that. Yeah.
There is one more specific Los Alamos question here that I could answer, if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah, of course.
Sheldon Armstrong's asking, what is Los Alamos publication rate in Cambridge journals? And I don't remember exactly, but I would call it relatively low. It's like a dozen or less a year. Is that right, John?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we consider this agreement dip our toes in the water and learn some lessons along the way before, you know, we went any bigger. But our agreement is uncapped. There are not limitations on the number of articles that can be published open access under this agreement.
That's right. Yeah. So we've just struck 3 o'clock, so I'm conscious of the time. So yeah, maybe we should sign off there. But thank you all very, very much for your time today. I hope it's been interesting, and I hope we can continue these discussions in some form at some point in the future. Carol, thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
Yes, thank you for including me. It's been very, very interesting.
And thank you, John. And again, thank you, Carol, for your time. We really appreciate your jumping on and walking through all of this information. I would just remind folks out there listening in, we did record today's session, so please do be on the lookout for that follow-up email from ACRL and Choice. And after you sign out of the webinar today, you should be redirected to a quick survey. If you could just take a moment to fill that out and let us know what you thought of the presentation, of the technology, all of that, we would really appreciate it. So thank you very much for your time, everyone out there. We hope to see you again in the near future.
Thank you very much. Bye.